Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the burst of joy. You might be looking at this photo wondering how this extremely joyous photo could hold any dark secrets. Well, this photo won a Pulitzer Prize, and for a very good reason. The photo was captured by Slava Vedder on March 17, 1973 at the Travis Air Force Base in California. The photo shows United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Sturm and his family. This was taken as he was being reunited with his family after 5 years of being held as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. On October 27, 1967, he was leading a flight of F-105s when he was shot down over Hanoi and held captive until March 14, 1973. I can't imagine what this must have been like for his family, because there was a chance that he could have not come home at all. The girl with her arms wide open is his daughter, but the looks on all of their faces truly captures the pure joy that they are all feeling. In our number 9 spot today, we have the reflecting pool. This is one of the creepiest or chilling images ever taken. It depicts a young girl in a graveyard who is looking down at her reflection in a pond. Okay, maybe a little eerie, but not exactly chilling. What really makes this photo what it is, however, is that there are seemingly 2 reflections looking back up at the little girl. No one knows who the girl is, where she is, or when this photo was taken, but it is estimated to have come from somewhere around the early 1900s. The photo was analyzed, and it has been said that it is unaltered or edited. Who knows how this photo was possible? Maybe there was some sort of invisible entity standing beside her that we could only see in the reflection, like a reverse vampire or something. In our number 8 spot today, we have the neighborhood nuclear test. This photo shows a mother and her young son looking out the window and witnessing a nuclear test explosion from the comfort of their own home in 1953. Like, what? Imagine seeing that from your window now in 2023. People would be going wild. And of course, any kind of nuclear test should be done as far away from where people live as possible. I know it's not like the test was being done in their front yard or anything, but I still certainly wouldn't be comfortable with them testing a nuclear device anywhere near the place I live. This photo was of course taken before the effects of nuclear radiation from these kinds of explosions were publicly understood. Actually, people have suggested that the public knowledge of these kinds of side effects were suppressed during this time in order to avoid controversy about them testing these kinds of weapons in your neighborhood. Well, that would of course be something insane to witness firsthand. Thankfully, the now widely known health risks associated with this sort of thing has caused this to not be a common occurrence anymore. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Boston Marathon. This photo comes to us from 1967, and it depicts the struggles that Catherine Switzer went through in order to be the first female to finish the Boston Marathon. The photo shows race organizers as well as other participants trying to stop her from running the marathon that she had trained for and was more than capable of completing. She has written a book that explains in great detail all of the things she went through that day and how the critiques and opinions about a woman running the race started even before she had registered to run. People in our history like Catherine are very important, as well as photos like these, because they show when people were literally trying to drag her down, she just kept on running. In our number 6 spot today, we have the reenactment. This photo is extremely unsettling, and for a very good reason. If, when you look at this photo, your instincts tell you that the guy in them is creepy, ding ding ding, you're right. This is a photo that features the German serial killer Joachim Kroll. He is known for taking the lives of 14 people, all varying in age, and he is also known for consuming parts of their flesh. This monster was caught in 1976, and he was discovered when police found out that he had been clogging the plumbing in his apartment with the remains of one of his victims. How gruesome is that? This photo was taken shortly after he was caught and arrested, and what you're seeing is Kroll reenacting one of his crimes for the police. I get goosebumps just thinking about that. I couldn't imagine being there or being the police officer that he's on top of. Talk about terrifying. I'm just glad that they caught him and got him off the street. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Stanley Hotel. This is a photo of the Stanley Hotel, which is the hotel that inspired the famous Stephen King novel, The Shining. This hotel was under construction in the early 1900s and saw a fateful day in 1911. There was an unexplained explosion that happened in room 217. In the explosion, a chambermaid was seriously injured, but she did end up surviving, and she actually returned to work. A few years later, she passed away, and ever since her passing, there have been tons of guests who swear that they saw her ghost. Guests have said that they have seen her around the halls of the hotel, but the place that gets the most paranormal paranormal activity is of course room 217. This is the room where Stephen King and his wife stayed for one terrifying night in 1974. Apparently they were actually the only guests at the hotel for this night, which at any other hotel might be kinda cool, but I feel like this is not what you want from a haunted hotel. In our number 4 spot today we have the Rothschild Surrealist Ball. The Rothschild family is one of the wealthiest and most powerful families there has ever been. For years and years there have been many rumors swirling about just how powerful and influential they really are, and there are some pretty crazy theories out there. In 1972 the family held a surrealist ball, which is where this photo comes from. These photos could potentially be very innocent, but there is just something about these very elaborate masks, coupled with the theories about what this family is really up to, that just makes it feel very eerie. I know it's kind of like conspiracy feeling, but I don't know, there's something very haunting about this. This party is one of the most legendary there has ever been, and whether or not they really are involved in shady dealings, that still is pretty impressive. In our number 3 spot today we have John Lennon. Of course we all know John Lennon as one part of the Beatles who went on after they disbanded to have a very successful solo career. Lennon was not only a musician, but he was also a peace activist who was strongly anti-war. He was not afraid to display his activism and held a 2-week anti-war demonstration. There was a period of 3 years where the Nixon administration was trying to have him deported for his criticism against the Vietnam War. That's how active he was. On December 8th, 1980, Lennon was leaving the Dakota apartment complex when he was stopped by a man named Mark David Chapman. Lennon signed an autograph for Mark, which is what is happening in this photo, and then Lennon went on his way. Little did he know, Mark was going to shoot him later that night. Once Lennon returned to the apartment complex, Mark was there waiting for him to commit his crime. Mark has said he did it mostly for attention, which is very horrifying, but Mark is also a very religious man who explained that Lennon once saying that the Beatles were more famous than Jesus is what really pushed him to commit this crime. It is very crazy that this photo was captured when Lennon was being so kind to who he thought was a fan, and no one would have ever predicted what would happen just a few hours later. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Hindenburg. This is a photo that was taken during what is now known as the Hindenburg disaster. It is commonly known that blimps, or these kinds of floating airships, use helium in them to float through the air, and it's important to note that helium isn't the choice because it's the only option, but rather because it's one of the safest options, and that is due to the fact that it isn't extremely volatile. Because of a US ban on the exportation of helium at the time, i.e. the Helium Control Act of 1925, although the Hindenburg was designed to use helium, there was a lack of it available, so on the day of the Hindenburg disaster, the much more flammable hydrogen was used instead, and this led to, well, complete disaster. When the Hindenburg floated off on May 6, 1937, it disastrously caught fire during its flight, with 97 people on board. Sadly, due to the fire, there were 35 casualties on board the flight that day. It is an absolutely horrendous situation, which teaches us all a very valuable lesson. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Mount Pinatubo. This is a photo that is showing Mount Pinatubo, which is located in the Philippines, on June 15, 1991. That is the day that this volcano erupted into what would be the second largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. Certainly impressive, also extremely terrifying. This photo shows the pyroclastic flow full of hot gas and rock being flung into the air. Eruptive activity at the volcano first started on April 2nd of that year, which prompted researchers to set up seismographs in the area. By June, the volcano was having a couple of progressively shallower eruptions before, on June 12th, the volcano had its first spectacular eruption, which sent an ash column 19 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Additionally, smaller explosions continued on June 13th, which then led to some intense seismic activity. After more highly gas-charged magma reached the surface, on June 15th the volcano once again exploded, this time sending the cloud of ash 40 kilometers up into the atmosphere. Volcanic ash and pumice blanketed the surrounding areas, and pyroclastic flows filled what were once deep valleys with fresh volcanic deposits. It was truly magnificent and extremely powerful, and this photo shows just that. I don't know about you guys, man, but like, Mother Nature, I'm afraid of her, alright?
Starting off with S for Secret. Alrighty, so here is from the Polish Constitution Day celebration in Chicago, specifically the one from 19 1978. On the left there, all washed out and crappy old flash display style, is First Lady Rosalind Carter. The guy shaking her hand, or rather just holding it and staring off camera like a waiter just went by with a tray of warm sausage rolls he wants to really get into, is John Wayne Gacy. And if you're also thinking, yo, what is up with this guy being in so many random famous photos, you're absolutely right, and it's genuinely strange how photographed and out there Gacy was. By the time this was taken, he had already killed over 20 people. Also, when he wasn't side hustling as a clown, he was super active in the government and politics, thus why wearing the S on the lapel. It was given to him by the Secret Service to indicate special security clearance. So the S literally does stand for secrets, both the US government's and his own. Whose secrets are worse though, huh? Anyways, at the bottom of the handshake photo, you can see the handwritten address to John Gacy, best wishes, Rosalind Carter. I've heard beauty is pain, but I haven't heard beauty is the next Saw movie? Check out the Beauty Calibrator. Seeing pictures, you may think it's some sort of Middle Ages torture machine, or as said, literally one of those Saw movie head devices. But surprisingly not, it's another way to point out women's insecurities and find the smallest things possible to make them feel bad over. Meet the Max Factor Beauty Calibration Machine. It is the only one in existence, thank God, and in 1932 the makeup legend Max Factor came up with this ingenious invention combining phrenology, cosmetics, and insecurity gaslighting with pseudoscience analysis of a woman's physical flaws. Max Factor's Beauty Calibrator enabled Hollywood makeup artists to pinpoint where facial corrections needed to be made down to a literal fraction. The machine, also known in the trades as the Beauty Micrometer, revealed that a natural perfect face was a myth. Every single woman was imperfect and needed correction, and this machine could find it by taking precise measures. It would mark spots that needed to be fixed, and then the artist, once the helmet was removed, could correct all the new insecurities with makeup that you didn't have before you put the stupid thing on. Next up is a photo that's all dramatic flair, the death card. Masseria represented an outdated mindset in the mafia world, one that could no longer be reasoned with diplomatically. The same is true of his rival Maranzano. The ongoing tit-for-tat killing between the two genuinely wreaked havoc on not only the streets but in the mafia hierarchy itself. Those resistant to change generally don't last long, and meetings of the mafia elite tried to bring around at the end of bloodshed, but Maranzano especially consistently manipulated matters to his own advantage. In order to facilitate underworld peace, the consensus turned from diplomacy to the inevitable. One of these guys had to go. The final straw, according to the account of Nicola Gentile, was when the police informants called Masseria and said knock off the violence. Having an idealism for peace, he actually responded by disarming his men, and they were all pissed. Joe the Boss, Masseria, his bodyguards, and Lucky Luciano all met at a seafood restaurant at 3 p.m. on April 15th of 1931. Luciano excuses himself from the card game while that they're playing to visit the bathroom. This is the signal for the hitmen. The bangs could be heard from around the block apparently, as Joe was hit from behind 4 times in the back and 1 in the head. And it's born, the infamous Ace of Spades shot. It added to the cult status of this hit, but many expect that the Ace of Spades card was placed between Masseria's fingers after the hit by a photographer just for the shock factor of the press. Next is a series of photos recovered before they could be lost. Holes in a window. Former LAPD reserve officer turned photographer Merrick Morton was faffing around in the LA Police Department when he comes across a stash of LAPD crime photos ranging in the dates of 1920s all the way to the 1970s. These were cellulose nitrate based film, and the negatives were so decomposed they're deemed fire hazard, but Merrick saw enough of the few stills to know that they'd be an absolute effing gold mine. Working with Phototeca Photo Digitation Service and the US National Film Archive, the photos were given a new life. This collection is NSFW, and there are hundreds. Now spruced up, the macabre photos are mostly crimes, and many of them violent and depicting the bodies or surviving victims' injuries. Obviously, the ones you're seeing on screen as I'm talking are tamer, such as my choice, the one you're seeing now, holes in the car window. Something about it gives me a deep sense of discomfort, thus the choice. The collection contains recognizable crimes and faces too, an unusual photo of Malaya Nurmi dressed as Vampira, pictures of comedian Lenny Bruce's OD in March of 1966, and images of the Manson family arriving at their arrangement in 1970. Every photo is scary, and every single has a disturbing backstory. Some captions are provided by author James Elroy in his book LAPD 53. You can win, but sometimes you still lose in the end. It's the devastated Disneys. Meet Howard Ashman and Alan Menken. There are some everyday photos of these two in their prime. Who were they? In case you couldn't tell by all the Disney crap in the background of said photos, they played somewhat of a big role role. You know, writing the lyrics and music for Oliver and Company, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and Beauty and the Beast, as well as a few others. Also, not to mention creating the Little Shop of Horrors, which got them hired by Disney in the first place. And in this photo you see now, they had just won the Oscars for The Little Mermaid. Hooray! But why does Ashman look so unhappy? This was his life's accomplishments. It's because that night Ashman told Mencken they needed to have a serious talk when they got back to New York. And when they get back a few days later, Ashman admits that he has HIV that's quickly progressed and he's going to die soon, and fast. They had been songwriting partners for over a decade and were in the middle of working on Beauty and the Beast, and despite the illness, Ashman completed the lyrical work and the initial work on Aladdin. On the morning of March 14, 1991, he does die from heart failure caused by his condition. At the time of his death, he only weighed 80 pounds, he'd lost his sight and could barely speak, and a voice that spoke so eloquently through song was lost forever. Before he passed, however, Disney Productions scrambled to finish the film so he could see a screening of it. The film earned Ashman and Mencken 3 1991 Academy Award nominations for Best Song, and the title song winning the award. Perhaps most amazingly, Beauty and the Beast was the first animated film ever nominated for an Academy Award for Best Motion Picture. So it looks like a photo of two men achieving their wildest dreams, but it's a record of their last normal moment together. Oh look, it's the D-Bags Day Off! Camp staff! Check out this jolly-go-lucky group. They got the day off of work because the weather was nice for the first time in a long time. During the wartime, that must have been awesome, especially being young. Finally shirk responsibility, maybe go get a pint, have a picnic, hang out with each other, maybe get a little frisky, lavishing in the sun. I'm done looking at them. In fact, I'm sick by having to look at them. When that group of people is gonna have lighted and silly summer fun on a day off, they're going back to their jobs at the camps of World War II to do exactly what you're thinking they would be doing for work when I say they work at the camps of World War II. And they enjoyed it. This wasn't one of those mandatory war jobs or excuses you can make up for following orders. These young adults, who may as well be the grandmothers, grandfathers, or great-grandma or pa of people even watching, chose to do this job and actively enjoyed it. So this is a good reminder it's not that far in the past, and these people most likely took lives shortly before or after this photo was taken. Did Halloween come early, or is it just Sylvester Claus? Yeah, so I chose this photo out of, trust me, like thousands of equally creepy ones because I feel it truly captures the what the bleep factor this holiday has. And they do it every 31st of December to 13th of January. The Sylvester Clausen of Ernach and the surrounding area Appenzell custom that is famous throughout Switzerland. The custom derives its charm from the unique blending of contrasts such as nature and art, mystery and tradition, harmony and anarchy. The Sylvester Claus that ushered the old year out and ring in the new. There are 3 types of these clauses: the beautiful, the ugly, and the pretty ugly. Common to all the clauses are bells in various shapes and sizes that they wear on their bodies. Their rituals begin in the early morning each day. The various Schupel meet at the village square before each group goes its own way. A group will pull up in front of your house, then hop around and jump up and down to make the bells ring, and then they start yodeling at you. You listen to the yodel, they say Happy New Year, give you some cash, some liquor you have to drink from a straw, and then they just leave. Dark backstory gossip, however, in times of poverty and hunger, which afflicted the region frequently, Clausen was a way to earn a little extra money, and in the 1930s, what was known as Belchel Claus, aka the Beggar Claus, began to appear on the streets. Essentially homeless Santa Clauses, but Santa looked like that. As a result, the influx of beggars in the Claus Guide resulted in heavy restrictions, and in the 1950s, the custom had nearly died out. It's only thanks to the initiative of individuals in the 1970s that this got to come back and enjoys enormous popularity today. Somebody come get their creepy uncle. Cannot tell me this isn't the energy this photo gives. Creepy uncle. The woman is unidentified, but definitely a follower to be able to handle that guy's BO and greasy hands on her. It was taken of the Children of God leader, David Berg. This group started in 1968 in California after Berg claimed God himself had gifted him with prophecies. In reality, Berg started making extreme demands of his followers, give up their money, worldly possessions in exchange for limited outside access, horrible cramped living conditions, brainwashing, and would make this group famous for really bad reasons I can't and would rather not get into. Former members of COG have been outspoken about the childhood they suffered growing up in the communes. Actress Rose McGowan, the most famously outspoken, published her story of 9 years in the group. Actors Joaquin and River Phoenix, also raised in the cult, had it harder than Rose, and that trauma plagued River especially. He was actually the original heartthrob of the 80s and 90s, a role, fun fact, DiCaprio only managed to take once River's substance addiction caused by his traumatic childhood unfortunately took his his life. So more of an unfun fact, but the matter stands that River painted the way for DiCaprio, and this psycho ruined a lot of people's lives. Have you ever seen a photo you can feel? Before you see the photo itself, you're gonna learn about the man in it. So, Joseph Goebbels, a National Socialist politician and propagandist who held multiple high-rank roles in the Yahtzee party. As a party chief for Greater Berlin, 1926 to 45, Reich leader of propaganda, 1929 to 45, and in 1933, the push-broom mustache twit appointed Joseph the Minister for Propaganda and Public Enlightenment. He was a devout, unbridled through and through bigot, a tireless agitator, and the propaganda this man designed, wrote, and funded had shipped through dozens of countries and shaped the perspective of Jews in a way that can actually never be undone. It's this propaganda many people still cite when asked for factual basis or logical argument as what Jews had done oh so wrong. It's Joseph who orders the mass burning of literature, who sentenced thousands to death, and who made up lies to ensure hatred, a hatred that still stands today. And I want you guys to see how he looked at them. So here is the photo, finally. This is a picture of Joseph Goebbels taken only seconds after he found out the photographer was Jewish. In this photo, you can feel it, and it's effing terrifying. And now, the last photo is from El Monte, 6 May. That's the date written on this photo from the LAPD Collective, and it's the only other photo from said collection I chose to put on this list aside from the holes in the car window. As follows is the photo and James Ellroy's written description of it. This is a detective modeling a mask worn by Baxter Shorter's crew. Shorter was in a gaggle with Emmett Perkins, Jack Santos, and Barbara Graham. The three of them then killed an old woman named Mabel Monahan on 9 March 1953. Shorter was appalled by his gaggle's violence. He ratted the others out, and Santo and Perkins kidnapped him in front of his pad on Bunker Hill, took him to the mountains, and killed him. Shorter had a sister that lived in El Monte, and they were hunting through it for evidence. This mask was in her pad. James Ellroy. If Mabel Monahan's former son-in-law Tudor Scherer hadn't been a Las Vegas gambler, the 60-year-old widow probably would have never been killed. Also, if she didn't stay friends with him after he divorced her daughter, that'd probably have helped. But she did, and people found that weird. So there had to be something at play, right? Maybe Scherer trusted her so much he stored his 100 grand floats there. Ex-cons Emmett Perkins, John True, and Jack Santos think that, and they plan to take it. Barbara Graham joins the group to be their key into the door. Mabel takes a while to open up, but Barbara persuades her with the story of a broken down car and pleas for the phone. Mabel was reluctant, but the young woman was alone, and the widow knew firsthand how scary it could be for a woman to be on her own at night, so she let her in. And in comes John True, Jack, Emmett, wearing rubber masks. We're gonna take a pause. Ladies and female presenters, our own sex does not guarantee our safety, and you can't predict anyone's intentions. Please trust your gut if it says don't open that door. Mabel is struck on the head, left gagged and bleeding in the hallway. The group ransacks her home for a safe that never exists and panic when there is none, so they just leave her there. Mabel is dead for 2 days in her home before she's found. The investigation into the slaying of the Burbank widow began, and it was a long one, filled with drama. In the end, the four are charged with conspiracy to commit burglary, robbery, and M-word on June 3rd, 1953, in the death of Miss Mabel Monahan.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the Mad Bomber. This is a photo that was taken of someone known as the Mad Bomber. His real name is George Metzke, and he was the man who terrorized New York City for 16 years while he planted explosives in public places like an absolute psychopath. I guess he was apparently angry about a workplace injury he had suffered in the years prior to his terrible crimes, and so of course the normal reasonable jump to make would be not that at all. While no one should have ever had to suffer because of these crimes, the good news is that while he planted 33 bombs and set off 22 of them, miraculously only 15 people ended up injured in the end. This photo of him behind bars is extremely eerie thanks to his creepy smile and haunting eyes. I might be the only one who feels it, but it just seems like something's off. You know? In our number 9 spot today, we have the Figures of the Fire. This photo is both extremely unsettling and super captivating as it shows a scene after the Great Fire at Madame Tussauds in 1925. Of course, this wax museum is famous for the extremely lifelike wax figures that are created and find their home there, so you can only imagine the aftermath of the fire. These lifelike figures with missing heads and appendages, burnt skin and hair, and just clothing in disarray. Seeing this photo for the first time without knowing the story behind it was definitely a bit of a confusing and terrifying experience. The heads on the ground really freaked me out for a full 5 seconds. As scary as it is, I'm glad to hear it's not real and just some creative casualties rather than what this photo appears to be at first. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Spectre. This is a photo that was taken in England in 1963, and it became known as the Spectre of the Newby Church. That is, of course, because of the ghostly figure that can be seen in the photo. I personally am always a little suspicious of ghost photos. Some are certainly more convincing than others, but Photoshop in 1963 wasn't exactly as accessible and easy as it is now. This photo is said to have been taken by Reverend K.F. Lord inside of the Newby Church, which is located in North Yorkshire, England. Of course, I mean, like many of us are going to do, people were really skeptical of this apparition and just believed it was a well done case of double exposure, which, to be fair, is entirely possible. The Reverend continued to swear up and down, however, that the photo was not doctored, so at this point, there's no proof to prove either side, and it's just a game of he said, she said. So, what do you guys think? Apparition caught slippin', or is the Reverend just making it up? In our number 7 spot today, we have the Tsar Bomba. This is a photo that was taken on October 30th, 1961. It was quite the Halloween spooky fright that year, as this is said to be the largest and most powerful nuclear weapon ever created and tested. The hydrogen aerial bomb was developed in the Soviet Union by a group of nuclear physicists that were under the leadership of Igor Kurchatov. The bomb was dropped by parachute and was detonated autonomously. While this test was meant to be a secret, turned out to be less than well kept, as it was obviously a huge explosion that was detected by United States intelligence agencies. A secret US recon aircraft called Speedlight Alpha was there monitoring the explosion, and it got so close that it had its anti-radiation paint absolutely scorched off. The photo clearly shows the bomb as it exploded, and it is said that this bomb was 5,000 times stronger than the ones that were dropped on Japan during World War II. That's not to say that those ones weren't strong, because they were absolutely devastating, it's just an example to show how large this one really was. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Three Jacksons. On August 21st, 1934, 3 fearless acrobats known as the Three Jacksons, Charlie Smith, Jewel Waddick, and Jimmy Kerrigan, all performed a routine on the edge of the Empire State Building, which is when this photo was captured. It is said that these 3 toured as an acrobatic trio, and this stunt the photo captured was done at 1,245 feet. According to officials from the Empire State Building, it is said that this was the first time the stunt was attempted, and to this day, it has never been done again, which makes a lot of sense. While this photo is absolutely incredible and is such a testament not only to the trust that they shared but also their abilities as acrobats, I don't know who in their right mind would try to recreate this. We already have one. I think we can just all be happy with that. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Gentleman of Rahi. This photo shows the Gentleman of Rahi, and that is not a gentleman and instead is the world's oldest surviving diving suit. It is an absolutely terrifying sight, but also an important pillar that allowed for this kind of technology to develop to what it is today. The suit dates back to the early 18th century, but it came to find its home at the Rahi Museum during the 1860s after it was donated. The suit was initially designed to allow people the ability to check the hull of ships without having to bring them into dry dock. The Old Gentleman is made mostly of leather with pitch thread used to stitch the seams. From here, the suit is sealed with more pitch, and then to create the waterproof coat, it is covered in a mixture of mutton tallow, tar, and pitch. Of course, underwater pressure increases dramatically, and this is why there's also wooden framework in the hood in order to keep it from collapsing under the pressure. At the top of the hood, there is an opening for a wooden air pipe. The air would be pumped to the diver, then it could be released from the suit through a pipe on the backside. Of course, this means that the suit wasn't completely watertight, so divers could only go under for a short period and couldn't dive very deep because there was only so much pressure the suit could take, but still, the suit was far better than having no suit at all. In our number 4 spot today, we have ectoplasm. This photo is said to have been taken in 1910, and it shows a medium in the middle of a spiritual seance. I don't know about you, but a 1910 seance sounds like an absolutely terrifying time. This photo is said to be catching the moment that ectoplasm appears out of the mouth of the medium. When we're talking about the occult and the paranormal, ectoplasm is a viscous substance that exudes from a spiritual entity, or sometimes the earthbound medium who is connected to or communicating with the spirit. It is said that this substance can take the shape of a face, or a hand, or a complete body, body, and it's usually seen in a darkened room during a sort of seance. And this is the way that the paranormal can physically manifest themselves in our world. So basically, what I'm saying is that this is supposed to be the moment that an evil entity is making themselves known in our world. Thankfully, at the end of the contact with the spirit, the ectoplasm will usually disappear as it returns to the entity, so it hopefully didn't stay around long, but this photo sure is something. In our number 3 spot today, we have the isolator. There are tons of strange inventions from the past. We have entire lists and videos dedicated to the strange inventions. There's so many. And while this is one that can be added to the list of bizarre inventions, it can also be added to the list of creepy ones as well. This photo shows what was meant to be a sort of anti-distraction contraption from the 1920s. Listen, I can get easily distracted, so sometimes I need a little help, but this thing really takes it to a new level. It essentially makes it impossible for the person to look at anything other than what is directly in front of them, or, you know, breathe. It seems like a contraption that requires an oxygen tank hookup probably isn't going to be the best anti-distraction device. In fact, I think that's probably more distracting than anything. Honestly, I'm such a good procrastinator that even with this thing, I still wouldn't get my work done. Thankfully, this device didn't stick around or gain much popularity, and now it is just a terrifying relic of the past. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Great Manta. In 1933, a New York silk manufacturer named A.L. Kahn was on a nice little vacation in Florida when he honestly accidentally caught something remarkable. His anchor line, by mistake, caught onto a giant manta ray. After a struggle and several hours, Kahn was able to get this actually enormous fish ashore. This monster was somewhere between 5,000 to 6,000 pounds and was 20 feet and 5 inches in width. For reference, there are other giant manta rays, but they usually grow to be around 13 to 14 feet wide, not 20 and a half. This photo is showing a taxidermy version of the fish, which Kahn used to bring around to exhibitions to show off his accidental cache. In an article from December 10th, 1933 of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch's Sunday magazine, Kahn is quoted as saying, "Fishing is a lot of fun when you catch the fish, and sometimes it's fun even when you don't, but when the fish catches you." And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the advertisement. This is a photo that comes to us from the time of World War II, and it shows a very terrifying kind of ad. The sign reads, "These men didn't take their atabrine," and at first I had absolutely no idea what that was. Turns out that atabrine was actually the first synthetic form of a drug which was used by the US military to fight malaria in the South Pacific during the war. It is estimated that as many as 2/3 of the troops fell ill with malaria. This sign is said to have been posted outside of a military hospital in New Guinea and was meant to serve as a warning for those who didn't take the medicine, warning that the skulls on top would be the fate that awaited them. Perhaps a little dark, but creative and likely effective nonetheless. At the very least, the ad is definitely quite clear.
Kicking off our list at number 10, the Pioneer's Defense. Right off the bat, yeah, look at this one. I don't have to explain why it's creepy in any way. A whole town appears to be wearing gas masks. Yeah, you could probably guess which era this is. This image was captured in 1937 by Russian photographer Viktor Bula. Adapting to new safety regulations these last few years have been challenging, no doubt about that. But in 1937, if you wanted to join the Young Pioneers, which is the Soviet version of the Boy Scouts, well, you had to wear these huge gas masks and part of military preparation. Yeah, welcome to Boy Scouts. Grab a button and then put this vacuum cleaner on your face. Enjoy. Break a leg. It's gonna hurt your back a bit. This photo is haunting. It's from the Leningrad area, and it happened while dictator Stalin was still in charge. These masks are so haunting to look at. We see them after the fact, but to see them being worn in real time in that photo, I don't know. Maybe this photo gets me because we can't see anybody's faces or ages. Right? Makes you paint the picture yourself. Either way, let's move on to some clown stuff, shall we? Number 9, 1910 clowns. Yeah, they existed back then, and they were much worse. Here's a fun fact, I didn't know this, but back in 2016, a study was done, and it turns out Americans fear clowns more than they fear death. Mind you, this was at the height of the clown craze back in America, but a poll was conducted by the Morning Consult in 2016, and it shows that 42% of Americans said they were in some capacity afraid of clowns. 42%. So if this is you, you may want to skip to the next one. I'll beat you there, no problem. This photo is from 1910, and it appears to be a jolly good time, right? 2 clowns for the price of 1. Nice, what a great deal. Let's go. Now what's terrifying about this photo, I'll admit, is that the clown on the right is much larger than the clown on the left. If you have a fear of giants, well, you're screwed here, really. Nowhere you can go. Just a tall clown and a little clown. There's clowns everywhere. I don't like clowns. Number 8, Anneliese Michel. If you've seen or heard of the 2005 horror film, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, this one here should ring a bell. This is the OG photo. How scary is that? Anneliese Michel was a devout Catholic living a normal life with her parents in Germany. This was back in the late 1960s, but seemingly out of nowhere, she began to black out before showing strange behaviors. And when I say strange behaviors, I mean she would hallucinate and eat spiders. Stuff like that. Yeah, it was pretty scary. It was also extremely unhealthy, but ultimately Anneliese claimed to be possessed by the devil, and her parents soon had to agree. Cut to 67 exorcisms later, Anneliese sadly died of malnutrition at age 23 in 1976. And like I mentioned at the start of this point, her story was so widely known and shocking that it eventually inspired the 2005 horror film, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which I have seen, and it is very scary. All real. Turns out. Sleep in fear. Number 7, the fire. This is a photo that comes to us from 2003. Not quite vintage, but still old enough. I'm 28. Yeah, where's time going? I don't know. This one came from the Station nightclub back in Rhode Island, and it shows the band Great White as they perform. Now, while this may seem like just a regular photo that somebody took on their Motorola Razr, what ensued shortly after this photo was taken is absolutely horrifying and tragic. Basically, as the band performed, there were some pyrotechnics that were set off, and they were meant to be a spectacular display, but they only ended up coming out as a disaster. See, the fireworks ended up setting all of the flammable acoustic foam in the walls and the ceiling all around them on fire. And it happened fast too, within 1 minute. Everything that was combustible ended up going in flames fast. Within 2 minutes, the entire club was fully engulfed in black smoke and people were having trouble finding exits. It was crowded, right? In the end, this fire took the lives of 100 people and another 230 were injured as a result. It has since gone down in US history as one of the worst and most deadly nightclub fires. Yeah, we look at Ball of Burning Men and think of what happened there. This is basically a 2003 version of that. More people, more flammable stuff, more pyrotechnics, and unfortunately, more deaths. Number 6, the Titanic. We all know the story of the Titanic. I mean, Olivia hasn't seen the movie, but we'll get to that later. It's one of the most famous in history, and this photo comes from just before that historic iceberg encounter. On April 10th, 1912, the Titanic set sail on its maiden voyage, heading from Southampton over to New York City. Now, the ship took a couple stops along the way, one in France and the other in Ireland, before setting off ultimately for the United States officially. Now, somewhere along the beginning part of its journey, somebody was able to snap a photo of the ship as it sailed away. Now, it's not clear exactly where this photo was taken because it's old and there's a lot of water, but it is thought to be the last photo of the ship ever before its tragic end. Considering it was only 4 days after the ship set sail that it hit the iceberg, it is likely that this photo came not too long before that terrible day. So yeah, they're probably right. This was probably the last photo. Number 5, Oroville Dam. On February 13th, 2017 in Oroville, California, the Oroville Dam, which is the tallest dam in the United States that holds back a reservoir that contains 1.1 trillion gallons of water, well, that dam's main emergency spillways were damaged. This led to the emergency evacuation of 188,000 people over concerns that the damage's emergency spillway might just fail at this point. This was all caused by torrential rain and floods in the region, which then began to reveal the extensive damage in said spillway. This photo here shows the dam releasing 100,000 cubic feet of water per second into the main spillway. This is a feat of engineering, if anything. Now, luckily, a major disaster was avoided in the situation because of quick action by those responsible, but to see it unfold and to see how fierce it is, I don't like water, or pressure, or dams, or history. Let's move on. Number 4, the lipstick killer. This is a photo that comes to us from December 10th, 1945. Now, if looking at this image gives you a weird shudder or chill down your spine, you got instincts. Nice. You've heard about this in some way, or yeah, you read the title. You know it's some bad stuff coming. This was written by a terrible person known as the lipstick killer. This photo is an image of a note that he left written on the wall at one of his crime scenes. Now, the photo comes from the apartment of Frances Brown, as just before he wrote this message, he, as you would have guessed, took her life, sadly. After this message was left, he ended up taking the life of another person because he was finally caught by police 6 months later. The message, put in the photo, reads, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." Yeah, the lipstick killer wrote that. It's the scariest thing I ever heard. It's an absolute chilling note with a horrifying backstory. A lot of killers are getting their Netflix specials now, so I'm sure it's only time before he gets one. Number 3, eruption of Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens is a stratovolcano located in Washington. Now the volcano is best known, of course, for its huge and disastrous eruption on May 18th, 1980. And we have a photograph of it, and it's very scary. This photograph comes from photographer Robert Landsberg, who of course was unfortunately in the area at the time of the eruption. Now before the eruption, he had visited the area in order to photograph and document all the changes that were happening. Didn't expect this one. On May 18th, he was within a few miles of the volcano when it did erupt. Now since he unfortunately was located so close to the eruption, he knew he wouldn't be able to escape this disaster. So instead of focusing on the impossible, he focused on taking as many photos as possible. Just like a historian at the end of his life, really. Robert was obviously incredibly brave and dedicated, and also very smart. After snapping as many photos as he could, including this one, he then secured his camera in his backpack and covered his backpack with his body. Protected history. It's like he knew he was unlikely to survive, but he still wanted to make sure that these photos did. That's why it was so important for me to bring it in this list today. His body was found 17 days later with his backpack still underneath him. Plan did work, and his film was of course developed and has provided geologists with some really valuable insights with his close documentation of the eruption. So historically, it's a feat, but also scientifically, it's one as well. Number 2, acid drum. This photo comes to us from the inside of the house of, well, you guessed it, another terrible person. The serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. Yeah, we all know him. This photo was taken from the inside of his home right after he was found and caught by authorities. Now before his arrest, he was sadly able to take the lives of 17 individuals. Now although this photo may look kind of plain, dare I say, the horrors behind it are plentiful. This shot is simple. It shows a drum full of acid that was located inside of his home. You can only imagine the horrors. I don't need to tell you what this was used for, obviously. And I can't imagine the horrors that investigators saw when they first arrived to his house. Even investigating the crimes is one thing, but to show up and see this, it's too much. Thankfully, Jeffrey was caught, and in 1992, he was sentenced to life in prison, but just 2 years later, he was killed by a fellow prison inmate. Insert Curb Your Enthusiasm music. And finally, number 1, Europe flood. This photo comes to us from the summer of 2022, as people across Western Europe experienced disastrous flooding. Now, after days of heavy raining, it ended up turning rivers that were usually normal and calm into these raging currents that ravaged the streets, and sadly left cars and power lines just being swept away. Homes too, they got engulfed and residents were trapped inside. This photo was taken in Erstadt, which is just southwest of Cologne, and it shows how a bunch of houses collapsed due to subsidence, which is the sudden sinking of the ground surface below. Now unfortunately, these floods caused many people to lose their lives, mostly in Germany, but these were sadly dozens of people in Belgium as well, pretty much everywhere. Bigger than we thought initially, all of which was an absolute tragedy. Rescue workers worked tirelessly to help as many people as possible escape this terrible situation. I couldn't even imagine responding to this, let alone being caught up in it. It's terrible. Those are the top 10 most unsettling vintage photos forbidden to the public. If you have any other ideas and stuff, comment down below. There's a lot of photos of horrible eras out there, and I'll find them.